They were his favorites, his iron fist, his last hope. He built them from nothing, and they walked with him through hell. But when the moment of truth came, they betrayed him twice. At the very beginning of the Gallic War, when Caesar was just starting to carve his name into history with blood and steel, he left his troops to winter in Gaul and returned himself to Italy. There, in the northern lands, he raised two new legions, the 13th and 14th. No one knew then that one of them would become legend. The other changed its shadow. But the 13th? It would be the one to decide Rome's fate. It was 58 BC. Gaul, vast, wild, filled with tribes who had never known order. Where other Romans saw chaos, Caesar saw opportunity, a chance to become legend, a chance to become a god. But he had no army, only 4 legions granted by the Senate, and enemies, tens of thousands strong. Then came the first blow. Ariovistus, chieftain of the Germans, an ally of Rome, until he became a threat. He invaded the lands of Rome's allies, and Caesar, without orders, marched to war against him. The Senate raged, but Caesar did not stop. He crushed Ariovistus, and he understood, to survive, he needed his own army, not the one given to him in Rome, but one that would fight for him to the end. He returned to northern Italy, to Cisalpine Gaul, a land where lived not patricians but common Italians, those without full rights yet ready to die for anyone who gave them a chance. Right there, in 58 BC, he raised 2 new legions, the 13th and 14th. No one expected them, no one believed in them. They were recruits, blacksmiths, farmers, sons of craftsmen, not veterans, not heroes, just boys with swords. But Caesar had no intention of sparing them. He threw them into Gaul, among veterans who had fought in Spain, who had stared death in the face. And he told them, learn, survive, or die. The first months, small skirmishes. Subjugation of tribes, the Suessiones, the Ambiani, the Bellovaci. The 13th learned, watched, remembered how to hold a shield, how not to panic when the enemy screams in your face, how not to run when your comrade falls beside you. But the real test lay ahead. The nervy, the fiercest, the most merciless. Caesar himself wrote, they know no fear, they ask no mercy, they fight until they fall. Caesar knew this would be a massacre, so he placed the recruits, the 13th and 14th, in reserve behind the veterans, just in case. He still didn't believe they could hold the line, but the enemy did not wait. As the Romans began building their camp by the river, the Nervii struck without warning, like a hurricane, like an avalanche. The Roman army was trapped, the camp half-built, supply wagons looted, cavalry fled. The Treveri, Gaul's finest horsemen, vanished into the woods, veterans surrounded. Everything burned, everything collapsed. And the 13th, they didn't even know the battle had begun when they climbed the hill. Before them lay hell, thousands of Gauls, screams, flames, the dead, the fleeing, panic. But the centurions, the same men who just weeks before taught recruits how to hold a gladius, shouted, shields forward, close ranks. And they did it, despite the fear, despite no one teaching them how to fight in such chaos. They stood, took the blow, held the line, while the 10th Legion, Caesar's favorite, smashed the enemy's flank. When the battle ended, Caesar walked to them personally. He didn't give grand speeches. He simply said, now you are mine. They survived. They earned his trust. But Caesar didn't know that one day these same men would raise their swords against him himself. Why? What broke them? Hint, it wasn't gold, not power, it was honor, and it was worth more than life. We continue. This was the turning point. The 13th was no longer a recruit. It became Caesar's legion, his fist, his shield. Years passed. The legion became steel. Caesar trusted it as he did his beloved 10th, threw it into the most dangerous sectors, placed it beside him in decisive battles. When the Senate demanded legions be handed over, Caesar sent the 13th instead of the 15th. He thought it was temporary, but the Senate deceived him. The legion went to Pompey, and then Caesar understood. Peace was impossible. Caesar now took them everywhere, on campaign against the Bituriges, just to show strength. And it worked. The tribes surrendered without a fight. Caesar wrote, "I took both legions because the territory was large." But everyone understood. He no longer doubted the 13th. He believed one legion could hold an entire region. At Gergovia, he placed them beside the 10th, on the most dangerous flank, where the battle's outcome would be decided, and they held. By 52 BC, the 13th was no longer just a legion. It was a symbol that Caesar could build an army from nothing and make it stronger than any in Rome. But in Rome, this did not please anyone. After the disaster at Carrhae, where 20,000 Romans perished, the Senate panicked. It demanded reinforcements for the east, ordered Caesar and Pompey to each surrender a legion. Caesar surrendered the 15th, the one stationed in Italy, but then came the treachery. The Senate did not send the legion east. It handed it to Pompey, Caesar's direct rival. This was the signal. The Senate no longer trusted Caesar. It feared him. It wanted to break him. Caesar understood. If he obeyed, his army would be disbanded. He would be charged with crimes, sent into exile or to execution. After everything he had done for Rome, he tried to negotiate. Let Pompey disband his army too, and I will do the same. The Senate refused, declared Caesar an enemy of the state. Caesar looked at the map. Where were his veterans? In Gaul. Far away, and nearby, only one legion, the 13th. The one he had once raised from simple Italians, the one that had walked with him through hell, the one that had not yet betrayed him. He gave the order. And here, the moment that changed everything. The Rubicon River, the border, beyond it, Rome. The 13th Legion formed ranks on the bank. Before them, the border. Before them, the forbidden line. Before them, civil war. Caesar stood long by the water, the camera on his face. What is he thinking? Fear? Doubt? No. He had decided everything back in Gaul. He waits for dawn, because he wants to cross not as a traitor, but as a hero, in daylight, head held high, with a legion that believes in him. The sun rises, he takes a step. He says, "Let the die be cast," and the 13th steps after him. This is not just crossing a river. This is the end of the Republic. This is the birth of the Empire, and all of it rests on the shoulders of one legion, the 13th. Cities surrendered without a fight. Garrisons switched sides. Pompey fled. Italy fell. The 13th became the symbol of inevitability. But they crossed the Rubicon and made Caesar emperor. They saved an entire province from destruction and raised a rebellion against Rome. They restored the empire's honor and betrayed their creator twice. Why did Caesar weep when he learned who defended Cordoba? Why did the Senate tremble as they marched through Italy? And how did one legion become a symbol not of loyalty, but of freedom? 49 BC, after crossing the Rubicon, everything went smoothly. Cities surrendered without resistance. Garrisons joined Caesar's side. Pompey fled to Greece. The Senate panicked. The 13th Legion became the symbol of inevitability. Where it appeared, there was no resistance. People saw in them not conquerors, but liberators. From corruption, from cowardice, from the Senate's hypocrisy. But Caesar knew the war was not over. Pompey lived. His army in Greece, his fleet controlled the sea. His allies in Spain, Africa, the East. To win, he had to strike on all fronts. So he gave the order, 13th and 14th, to Spain. Spain, the land where Pompey's finest legion stood, experienced, battle-hardened, loyal. Caesar sent his children there, the 13th and 14th, not to fight, to intimidate, and it worked. Pompey's commanders surrendered without battle. Legions switched to Caesar's side. Victory, nearly bloodless. Caesar was pleased. He left the legions in Spain for winter quarters, under the command of a new governor, Cassius. He did not know this decision would become his greatest mistake. Cassius, not a warrior, not a strategist, he was a careerist, a man who saw in war not glory but opportunity to enrich himself. He arrived in Cordoba, wealthiest city in Spain, and began to plunder, imposed taxes that never existed, arrested the wealthy, on false charges, demanded ransom or execution, confiscated lands, looted temples, sold offices. The legionaries watched and could not believe their eyes. These were the same men who crossed the Rubicon for justice, now watching a Roman official abuse the very province they had just liberated. Caesar was far away, in Greece, preparing for the decisive battle against Pompey. He did not hear the cries, but the cries grew louder. It began with the centurions. They went to Cassius to plead for mercy for an arrested merchant. Cassius not only refused, he ordered them flogged, publicly, like common soldiers. This was the breaking point. The legionaries gathered at night, around a fire, without orders, without banners, just yegit men, tired, angry, betrayed. They killed several centurions loyal to Cassius, elected a new commander, Marcellus, and marched on Cordoba, not against the enemy, not against Pompey's men, against their own governor. This was not a rebellion against Caesar. This was a revolt for honor. Cassius panicked. He fled Cordoba. Gathered loyal legions, raw recruits hastily assembled, took position on a hill, feared to engage because he knew before him stood veterans, those who stood at the Rubicon, those who crushed the Nervi, those who feared no death. Instead of battle, he sent cavalry. They attacked at night, burned houses outside the city, killed civilians, hoped to break the rebel spirit, but they got the opposite. The 13th, furious. They begged Marcellus, "Give the order, we will crush him." Marcellus did not want fratricide, but he had no choice. The legions formed ranks, shields forward, banners in the wind. They marched on Cassius's camp, not as rebels, but as judges. Cassius refused battle, waited for reinforcements, received them, legions from neighboring provinces. But even with them, he dared not attack, because he knew if Caesar's veterans charged, it would be over in an hour. Caesar finally received word, sent his trusted man, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, the same man who would later become the third member of the triumvirate. Lepidus arrived with legionaries and commanded, "Lower your swords, I am the judge." Marcellus obeyed, without hesitation. He did not want war, he wanted justice. Cassius resisted, thought Lepidus was on his side, but Lepidus acted wisely, met Cassius personally, said, "You signed your own sentence, your taxes, your executions, your fires, even your own soldiers hate you." Cassius surrendered. Lepidus entered Cordoba, appointed a new governor, restored order, and Cassius? He did not go with him. He boarded a ship with chests of gold stolen from the province, thought he would escape, hide, live in luxury, but the sea does not forgive traitors. Storm, waves, the ship sank. With the gold, with the thieves, with the crew. Caesar, learning of this, wrote in his notes with cold amusement, "Fate itself passed judgment, and it was just." Caesar did not punish them. On the contrary, he was proud. Because they did what no one else would, stood against a tyrant, even if he wore a Roman toga. And Cassius? His ship, laden with gold, sank in a storm. Caesar wrote of it with cold irony. Fate itself passed judgment. But war does not forgive betrayals, even the noblest ones. Caesar defeated Pompey, returned to Rome, became dictator, thought the war was over, but no. The last Pompeians fled to Spain, raised rebellion. Caesar marched his army against them to the Battle of Munda, and then shock. In the enemy ranks, the 9th Legion, one of the oldest, one of the favorites, and the 13th, the very one that crossed the Rubicon, that saved Cordoba, that Caesar called my honor. Why? Historians still argue, but the facts speak for themselves. Caesar left them in Spain, far from himself, did not give promised land or rewards, did not replenish losses. The legion was exhausted, and most importantly, stationed them in Cordoba, the city they had already saved, and which now begged for their protection from Caesar himself. When Pompey's men fled to Cordoba, the 13th could not raise their swords against them, especially not against the recruits, those trembling with fear, those crying, "You protected us once, don't kill us now." They chose honor over orders. Caesar approached the city, expected surrender. Instead, saw familiar shields on the walls, familiar faces, his own veterans. He sent heralds. offered mercy, promised forgiveness. The 13th remained silent, prepared for battle. Caesar, furious and desperate, he wrote, "I have seen my soldiers fight barbarians, but to see them against me, this is a pain no cure can heal." The siege lasted days, then weeks. Caesar called for reinforcements, smashed the walls with battering rams, set the gates ablaze. When the city fell, a terrible slaughter began. More than 20,000 people killed on the spot. No mercy, no trial, in the rage of victors. Among them, those very legionaries who once stood with Caesar at the Rubicon, those he called brothers, those who believed in him until he became what they had once risen against. Caesar returned to Rome, victorious, but with empty eyes. He pardoned the survivors, restored the legion, but the soul of the 13th was broken. A year later, Caesar was murdered. A new civil war began. The 13th went to Mark Antony, then to Octavian. It was renamed, merged with another legion, given a new name, Gemina, the twins. But everyone knew it was still the same 13th. With its memory, with its pain, with its honor, the 13th Legion served for more than 400 years, stood on the empire's borders, repelled barbarian raids, participated in coups, supported emperors, and overthrew them. The last mention, early 5th century AD, when Rome fell, when barbarians entered the city, when the legions vanished, but the legend remained.